no one was ready for what Malcolm-Jamal Warner's mother finally revealed. For years, she had stood quietly in the background, guarding her son's privacy with fierce determination. But after Malcolm's sudden and heartbreaking death, she couldn't keep the truth locked away any longer. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to say. She spoke not only as a grieving mother but as a witness to decades of Hollywood's hidden tensions, the good, the bad, and the parts no one dared to talk about. And when her words came out, they didn't just touch fans, they shook them. Pamela spoke about Malcolm's life behind the scenes of The Cosby Show, a world that, to the public, looked perfect. But her account painted a different picture, one of a young man caught between stardom and reality, between loyalty and the shadows cast by others' actions. It was a story no one saw coming, one that would make you question everything you thought you knew. This is not just the story of a beloved actor's life and tragic end. This is the story of a mother who watched it all happen, and who, in the end, decided the world deserved to hear the truth. Long before the cameras, the applause and the fame, there was a boy from New Jersey with an energy you couldn't ignore. Malcolm was sharp, charming, and full of dreams bigger than most kids his age could even imagine. But behind him, guiding every step, was Pamela Warner, a single mother who saw her son's light and refused to let the wrong people dim it. From his first auditions to his earliest appearances, Pamela was there. She was the one making sure contracts were read, that his schoolwork wasn't forgotten, and that Hollywood's false promises didn't swallow him whole. By the time The Cosby Show came calling, Pamela already knew the entertainment industry was no place for the naive. She wasn't going to let her son be just another child star chewed up and spat out. She fought for him, for his safety, his happiness, and his right to be more than just Theo Huxtable in the public eye. The world fell in love with The Cosby Show almost instantly. Families across America tuned in every week to see the Huxtables laugh, learn, and grow together. Malcolm, as Theo, became a household name. He was the cool big brother every kid wished they had, funny, relatable, and full of heart. But while the set was filled with laughter, Pamela saw more than what the audience did. She saw the pressure that came with being part of a groundbreaking show. She saw the long hours, the constant media attention, and the weight of living up to the image of the perfect TV family. Pamela protected Malcolm fiercely, even when it meant clashing with producers or questioning decisions made on set. She knew fame could be a blessing, but it could also be a trap, one that kept young actors from truly knowing who they were outside of their roles. Years after the show ended, the legacy of The Cosby Show was forever altered. The arrest of its star, Bill Cosby, sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and into the lives of every cast member who had once been part of that TV family. For Malcolm, the news was devastating. He had grown up under Cosby's mentorship, but now his name was forever tied to a scandal he had nothing to do with. Pamela saw the toll it took on her son. The frustration, the anger, the endless questions from reporters who wanted him to speak out. He was careful with his words, refusing to attack outright but making it clear he condemned wrongdoing. Still, Pamela knew that behind closed doors it hurt. Not just because of what happened to the show's reputation, but because it made people look at Malcolm differently, as if he somehow carried part of a burden that was never his. And in Pamela's mind, this was where the seeds of her eventual revelation were planted. When The Cosby Show ended, Malcolm faced a challenge that so many child stars never overcome, escaping the shadow of his most famous role. The world saw Theo Huxtable, but Malcolm was more than that. He was a man with passions, ideas, and a deep love for music, poetry, and directing. Pamela remembered those years well. She saw her son push himself into new roles, take on projects that didn't rely on nostalgia, and demand that Hollywood respect him as an artist in his own right. He didn't just act, he directed episodes of TV shows, recorded spoken-word albums, and performed on stages far from the bright lights of network sitcoms. But the climb was steep. The entertainment industry can be unforgiving, especially to actors who once belonged to something as iconic as The Cosby Show. People wanted Theo back, not Malcolm's growth. And Pamela often found herself encouraging him late at night, reminding him of his worth, telling him that his legacy would be built not by one role, but by a lifetime of work. Then came the day that changed everything, not just for Bill Cosby, but for everyone who had ever worked alongside him. The arrest made headlines around the world, and suddenly, every cast member's name was back in the news. For Pamela, it was a nightmare. She knew her son had no involvement, but she also knew how the media worked. They wanted drama. They wanted guilt by association. Malcolm stayed calm in public. He spoke carefully, choosing his words to make it clear that he condemned abuse in all forms. But Pamela could see the tension in his jaw, the heaviness in his eyes. To him, it wasn't just about the headlines. It was about losing a part of his past that had meant so much to him and to millions of fans. The scandal created a strange kind of silence between Malcolm and parts of the industry. Doors that had once been open now hesitated to swing wide. And Pamela began to realize something important. Her son's career wasn't just being shaped by his talent, but by forces completely out of his control. What the public didn't see were the late-night conversations between Pamela and Malcolm during those years. In the privacy of their home, they spoke honestly about the industry, the people they trusted, and the things they had both witnessed but never talked about publicly. Pamela had always been Malcolm's safe place, the one person who would never twist his words or use them against him. And in those moments, she learned truths that most fans would never hear. She heard about the pressure to keep quiet on certain topics. She heard about moments on set that didn't match the glossy, perfect image shown to the world. She heard about friendships that turned distant when the Cosby scandal hit, and how quickly loyalty could vanish in Hollywood. These were the conversations that stayed with Pamela, the ones that made her realize that one day, the world might need to know a side of Malcolm's story that had been hidden for decades. And when her son passed away, she knew that day had come. People think they know your child because they've seen him on television for 30 minutes a week. But my Malcolm was so much more than what you saw on that screen. He loved hard, he trusted carefully, and he carried his burdens quietly, too quietly sometimes. He never liked people prying into his personal life, and I understood why. Hollywood takes and takes, and if you're not careful, it'll take the last piece of yourself. From the outside, Malcolm's personal life seemed like a mystery. He was private, deliberate about who he dated, and fiercely protective of the woman who eventually became his wife and the daughter they shared. Unlike so many celebrities who used social media as a window into their lives, Malcolm kept his home life sacred. Pamela knew that choice came from experience. The entertainment industry had a way of turning intimacy into headlines. Malcolm didn't want his family living under the weight of that. He wanted his daughter to grow up in a world where her father was known for his work, not his gossip value. Behind closed doors, Malcolm was a deeply affectionate father. Pamela remembers mornings when he'd make pancakes shaped like animals just to see his little girl smile, or nights when he'd strum his guitar softly so she could fall asleep to music instead of a television. But there were also moments when she could see the weight he carried, the weight of keeping up appearances, of making sure his family never saw the full strain of his career and the shadows it came with. Pamela sometimes wondered if those unspoken stresses were slowly building inside him. Stresses that no one outside the family could truly understand. When Malcolm told me he was taking the family to Costa Rica, I could hear the excitement in his voice. He said, "Mom, I need this. I just need to breathe for a while." And I thought, good. My boy needs peace. He's given the world enough. It's time he gave himself something back. The Costa Rica trip was supposed to be a celebration, a break from the relentless rhythm of work, interviews, and industry demands. Pamela didn't join them. She wanted him to have this time with his wife and daughter. The photos from the first days were beautiful. Clear blue waters, sunsets that looked painted, Malcolm with a rare, relaxed smile. For a few days, it seemed like everything was finally slowing down for him. But July 20th, 2025, changed everything. That morning, Malcolm decided to take a swim with his daughter along the coastline. The water looked calm, but Costa Rica's shores can hide strong, unpredictable currents. Some details Pamela would later learn from his wife: how he laughed with his daughter, how he guided her through the shallow water, how proud he looked as she splashed. Then, in a matter of moments, the current shifted. Pamela's voice trembles when she talks about what happened next. "I wasn't there, but in my mind, I've replayed it 1,000 times. My son, fighting the water, trying to keep his little girl above the waves. The panic, the struggle, the way he would have ignored his own danger just to make sure she was safe. That's who he was. That's the kind of father he was." Rescuers reached them. His daughter survived. Malcolm didn't. The official word was drowning, but for Pamela, it was something deeper, a cruel ending for a man who had spent his whole life protecting the people he loved. 4 days after his passing, Pamela stayed silent. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because the grief was too raw. Every time she saw his picture on television or online, it was like someone reopening the wound. But then came the stories. Not tributes, those were fine. She welcomed the people who celebrated her son's talent and kindness. It was the other stories that tore at her: twisted headlines, rumors, and attempts to tie Malcolm's name back to the Cosby scandal in ways that had nothing to do with him. I couldn't sit by and watch them rewrite who my son was. I knew the truth. I lived the truth with him. And if I didn't speak, they were going to bury the real Malcolm under a pile of lies and half-stories. Pamela sat down and began to record her memories, her truths. She spoke about the young man who kept his dignity even when the industry tried to take it from him. She spoke about the days after the Cosby arrest, when Malcolm would sit in her kitchen at midnight, staring into his tea, saying, "Mom, they're going to make me answer for something I didn't do." She talked about the Hollywood politics, the way people turned their backs when it became risky to be associated with the Cosby Show. She shared stories of conversations Malcolm never wanted made public, stories about how the business really worked and how much he hated the fake smiles. And when Pamela finally let those words out into the world, they weren't just a tribute. They were a warning, a message to anyone listening that fame, no matter how bright it shines, casts long and dangerous shadows. Pamela Warner says, "I didn't want to do interviews at first. I didn't want to be on camera crying for strangers. But when I saw the stories they were telling about my son, I knew if I stayed quiet, the wrong version of Malcolm would be the one people remembered." Her decision to speak was not impulsive. Pamela had been around the entertainment industry long enough to understand how quickly narratives form, and how difficult they are to undo once they take root. In the days following Malcolm's death, media outlets replayed old clips from The Cosby Show and revisited interviews from decades past. For Pamela, some of those clips brought comfort, reminders of the joy her son had given to millions. But others twisted her stomach, not because of what Malcolm had said, but because of what the commentary around them implied. They made it sound as though Malcolm's life and career could be reduced to two things: his role as Theo Huxtable and the shadow cast by Bill Cosby's arrest. That, Pamela says, was unacceptable. "My son was not a scandal. My son was not a headline. He was a man, a father, a husband, and an artist. And if you want to talk about him, then talk about him for who he really was." So Pamela began sharing her own memories publicly. She described Malcolm as a man of deep convictions who refused to compromise his values, even when it cost him work. She told stories of him mentoring younger actors, of the countless times he quietly supported friends in trouble, never asking for recognition. The reaction was immediate. Fans flooded her messages, thanking her for showing them the Malcolm they never got to see. But along with the gratitude came something darker: pushback from people who didn't want the narrative to change. Pamela wasn't surprised. She had been expecting it. And she was ready. Pamela Warner says, "Let's be clear. Malcolm respected the craft, and he respected the work we did on that set. But don't think for a second that just because you see smiles on television, everything behind the scenes is perfect." For years, Pamela had kept her observations about The Cosby Show largely to herself. She believed in protecting her son's privacy and in letting his career speak for itself. But when the Cosby arrest put every former cast member under a microscope, Pamela began to understand that silence could be dangerous. She described the environment of the show as a mix of genuine camaraderie and unspoken rules. The cast had chemistry on screen, but Pamela says there were also moments when she had to step in as a mother and advocate for Malcolm's needs. She remembers times when production schedules pushed the limits for a teenager, times when he was expected to carry the emotional weight of storylines without much regard for how it affected him personally. It wasn't abuse, Pamela clarifies, but it was pressure. Pressure on a young man to perform perfectly every time, to never show weakness, to never let the audience see him as anything but Theo. And when you grow up like that, it stays with you. She also opened up about the aftermath of the Cosby scandal. After the arrest, it didn't matter that Malcolm had nothing to do with it. He got the looks. He got the questions. People who used to call suddenly didn't pick up the phone. That's what Hollywood does. It rewrites your worth based on other people's actions. Pamela's honesty was both refreshing and uncomfortable for many. She wasn't out to destroy the legacy of the show, but she refused to let her son's identity be defined by its darkest chapter. Pamela Warner says, "I'll tell you something Malcolm once said to me. He said, 'Mom, I've spent my whole life proving I'm not just Theo. Now I have to prove I'm not him in the worst way.' And that broke my heart." She explains that the Cosby arrest didn't just affect Malcolm's public image, it affected his spirit. Pamela noticed the change in small ways. He became more guarded in interviews, more selective with the projects he chose, and more protective of his family's privacy than ever before. In public, Malcolm appeared calm and confident. He handled every question with grace, never letting frustration slip through. But at home, Pamela saw the other side. The exhaustion. The quiet moments when he'd sit at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring into space. He didn't want to burden anyone, Pamela says. He carried it all inside, the disappointment, the frustration, the anger at being linked to something he had no part in. And when you carry something that heavy for that long, it leaves a mark. Pamela's voice grows firmer when she talks about why she's speaking now. People deserve to know the truth. Not the Hollywood version, not the headlines, but the truth about what it costs to be in this business, what it costs to be tied to someone else's mistakes. My son paid that price every day, and he still found a way to be kind, to love, and to create. Her words have the weight of both grief and purpose. She is not just telling her son's story, she's making sure it is protected from distortion. And in doing so, she's showing the audience that the Malcolm-Jamal Warner they thought they knew was only a fraction of the man he truly was. When Pamela's revelations began to circulate, they ignited conversations far beyond the usual entertainment news cycle. This wasn't just another celebrity gossip story. This was a grieving mother lifting the curtain on the reality of her son's life, career, and the burdens he carried. Fans who had grown up watching The Cosby Show found themselves reassessing what they thought they knew. Messages flooded social media, with people sharing their own experiences of being judged by association, or of fighting to be seen for who they truly were rather than what others assumed. The industry, however, reacted differently. Some praised Pamela's courage, while others questioned why she was speaking out now. But those who had worked closely with Malcolm, actors, musicians, directors, knew exactly why. They understood the fine line between protecting a legacy and letting that legacy be rewritten by others. Pamela didn't respond to every comment or criticism. She had no interest in debating strangers. Her focus was on telling the truth about her son, in full, without edits or distortions. At one point during an interview, she leaned forward, her eyes unwavering. Pamela Warner says, "You have to understand. I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to make sure they know the man my son really was. If that makes some people uneasy, then so be it." Her words cut through the noise, reminding everyone that this wasn't about public approval. It was about reclaiming her son's story before it was lost in the tide of false narratives. The more Pamela spoke, the more people began to appreciate the depth of Malcolm's work outside his most famous role. Clips of his spoken word performances resurfaced, interviews where he talked about fatherhood went viral, and fans rediscovered his music, his directing credits, and the passion he brought to projects far removed from the sitcom spotlight. This was exactly what Pamela wanted, for the world to see the full picture. She didn't just want him remembered as Theo Huxtable, but as a man who fought for his artistry, stood by his principles, and cared deeply for the people around him. She also wanted to highlight the resilience it took for him to continue working in an industry that sometimes treated him like a relic of the past. Malcolm never let bitterness consume him. He found ways to keep creating, even when the offers weren't pouring in. In one conversation, Pamela recalled how Malcolm once sat across from her, strumming his guitar, talking about the kind of legacy he hoped to leave. Pamela Warner says, "He told me, 'Mom, I don't care if they forget my face. I care if they forget the feeling my work gave them.'" And that's who he was, a man who wanted to touch hearts more than he wanted to chase fame. Her voice softened when she said it, but the meaning was powerful. She wasn't just keeping his memory alive, she was ensuring his values outlived him. 15 days after Malcolm's passing, Pamela still carried the same determination she had in those first raw days. The initial media frenzy had faded, but the impact of her words lingered. Fans continued to send letters, artwork, and messages of gratitude for showing them a side of Malcolm they had never known. Pamela had turned her grief into a mission, to protect her son's legacy and to remind people that behind every public figure is a private life, filled with battles the world never sees. She was no longer just the mother of a famous actor. She had become his voice, his defender, and the keeper of his truth. When asked if she ever worried about backlash, she shook her head. Pamela Warner says, "People will say what they want. They always do. But the only thing that matters to me is that when my son's daughter grows up, she'll know exactly who her father was. Not the headlines, not the rumors, but the man who loved her more than anything." Her words carried a finality, a quiet strength. This was the real ending to Malcolm's story, not the tragedy in Costa Rica, not the shadow of someone else's crimes, but the enduring love and truth his mother fought to preserve. And as the world slowly moved on, Pamela Warner made sure of one thing: Malcolm-Jamal Warner's real story would never be forgotten. If you've been moved by this video, make sure you stay with us. Hit that like button to let us know you stand with truth. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next video. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because the next chapter in the world of Hollywood's untold realities is coming soon.